Awesome. So Joel Florek, welcome, buddy. So for those of you who don't know Joel, I've known Joel for a while. He does multifamily. He's very entrepreneurial. He's also doing a fund for to buy some RV parks. He's doing all kinds of cool stuff. And when I did my first syndication, he is the guy that helped me. He kind of gave me his training wheels from when he did his first syndication. So he helped me quite a bit. But anyway, Joel is a really cool guy. He also bought one of my buildings and then made a small fortune off of my building. So anyway, with no more further ado, Joel, go ahead. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for having me here. And so I'm based out of Michigan City, Indiana. Current portfolio sits at 103 doors. I've got a 15 unit, 40 unit, and a 48 unit. Recently sold off 3 properties for 23 doors just a few weeks ago. So had a few more, but ended up moving on from those. I started investing with a little 4 unit. So I bought it out of college, borrowed some money from my parents for the down payment, got the bank to lend to the rest, lived in 1 unit, rented out the others, renovated at night when I'd get home from my day job. And from there, it was just a lot of creative financing for, about 4 years until I finally decided that I'd like to keep growing my portfolio, and I didn't necessarily have much funds for myself. So I decided syndication was a tool that I could use. I have structured my syndication deal such that it does allow me to buy out investors over time. And we've got a specific structure that we utilize to make that happen. The idea for me is I'm interested in the long-term equity benefits that come from real estate. Cash flows, nice little bonus, pays the bills, keeps a roof over my head. But what I'm really focused on is a long-term wealth building strategy. So back in 2019, did kind of first syndication with a 15 unit townhome property, just north of $1 million purchase. And then did another purchase myself, actually 20 units from John and one of his partners, and another 6 unit down the road from them. So went from a syndication to buying a deal myself, and then did another syndication on 4 units last December. And then I've done a bunch of trading this year. So sold off 5 assets and ended up picking up a 48 unit for myself. And that's kind of the long and short of my real estate career. Like I say, a lot of it was creative financing along the way. Added kind of syndication in there as a tool when I want to tackle a deal and don't necessarily have the funds for myself. So anyways, happy to kind of take the conversation.
When I first met you, you did multiple deals where you did seller seconds. That's not something that I hear a lot from other people. I've tried and failed a few times since then to get that to work. I guess tell our audience, how did you structure those and what's the advantage for the seller and the buyer and all that good stuff?
Yeah. So the first one I did, it was my second property. It was a 16 unit building back in 2016, purchased it for $685,000. The seller carried a note, second position note for 16.5%, and the bank financed in first position 80%. After all the prorations at closing, I got a small personal loan from Wells Fargo. It was $5,000 down for me to purchase that building. So kind of circling back, the mechanics of that is, I got the bank to finance the vast majority. In both cases of my seller finance deals, the bank financed 80%. What that allows is the seller gets most of their money when the property closes. So in kind of the deal, they get to walk away with a bunch of cash in their pocket, which everybody wants to do when they sell a property. Then seller holds a second position note, meaning if I foreclose on the property, it all goes bust. I don't pay my bills, and they got to take it back. The bank's going to get their money first. And then the second position note, it's literally sitting, in second position when they file the paperwork with the county. The seller would be in second position with their notes. After the bank gets paid back everything that they need, then the seller can get paid back from any proceeds in a foreclosure sale. But in both cases, that didn't happen. So it's nothing we had to worry about. Ultimately, to make that happen, you got to have two things. One is a willing seller. And then two, you need to have a bank that's willing to work within that structure. Most banks are not willing to allow you to purchase a deal without putting at least 20 to 25% personal equity cash into the deal. So the way that I find banks to do that is in each case, hop on the phone and I just start going down the list of speaking to banks. And, I probably called, particularly the second time around, I had to call about a dozen different banks and just gave them a quick little 2-minute spiel of saying, hey, I'm buying this property. Here's how I want to structure the deal. I'm looking for a bank to finance 75 to 80%. The seller is going to do a second position note for 10 to 15% of the purchase price, and then I'll bring the remainder to the deal. Is that a structure that your bank is willing to work with? And commercial lenders will really quickly tell you, yes, that's something that we have done, or no, it's not something we're comfortable with. And we can end our conversation or continue it based on that. It helps both of us be respectful of each other's time, which is nice. And then in each case for the deals that I've done, the seller, whatever terms we agreed on for our note, the loan, we had a balloon payment in there. So the term when it was due, the first time around was 3 years. And my plan was to reposition the property such that I could refinance at year 3, and through the refinance proceeds, pay off the seller's note, and was able to successfully do that, as well as pull another 140 grand that I was able to put my cash, put the cash in my pocket to roll into another deal. So the reposition worked way better than I originally thought. In the second case, it was a smaller seller second position note. So I was able to repay that after 18 months, which is when our balloon was due. And I paid that just out of savings that I had built up over the subsequent 18 months. And that was my original plan, to make sure I paid back that seller. John, is there anything that you want me to circle back on what I just described?
No, that's awesome. I think, my goal here is for us to kind of have a kind of rolling conversation and like a nice long Q&A at the end, because you've done a lot of cool stuff already in your career. Barish asked a question I think we can roll into. Have you used agency debt, or have you always used local banks thus far with the types of deals you've done?
I have not done any agency debt yet. The reason being is twofold. One, I have generally not heard good experiences from folks in my network that have used agency debt when it comes to being able to close in a timely manner. For me, that has been generally an important consideration in the deals, making sure that the sellers feel comfortable that I can close. So typically my closing periods are as short as 45 days, and I think the longest was 60. So, typically agency debt tends to take longer, and you should budget 60 to 75 days. And in many cases, I know that it has gone longer. So that has been one reason. The second reason I haven't used agency debt yet is I have known that I've wanted to refinance the deals within typically a 3-year period. And then I also have been unsure at times of exactly how long I want to hold on to the properties. So I don't want to lock myself into hefty prepayment penalties if I know that I'm going to refinance in 3 years, or potentially sell within 3 to 5 years of purchasing the property. So that has been another consideration. I would say the third is agency debt is a little more expensive to get into with the initial fees. So considering a shorter hold period, the community banks have been a much more flexible tool. I don't get as long of amortization, which means I don't cash flow as well. And I don't get as good of an interest rate, which means I'm paying a little more in interest every month. But thus far with my hold periods, the benefits have far outweighed the costs. And it does work out on paper that way when I look back.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because I had such a good experience with my first agency loan, and I plan to do many more, but I think you have to be holding the property for a while because there's all these things that kind of build in where if you try to sell it, you have to pay a lot sometimes to sell. So, or you have to
I
have
haven't
somebody
had
else
any
assume it.
prepayment penalties on any of my deals. There's been no refinance penalties associated with them. And I've never paid more than $5,000 in fees to a bank upon closing a deal.
Wow, that's awesome. Joel, why don't we pivot a little bit and talk about syndication? So I know, like I kind of mentioned in the lead up to this, that you've done more syndications than I have. I'm in the middle of my first one and only 4 months in. So I admittedly am a rookie there. How have you done syndication? You have a kind of a different angle on it too, where you have like a buyout provision where you can buy out the investors. I guess talk about that. Why have that? Why is it good for the investors that invest in your deals? Why is it good for you? Just kind of give us the 2-minute overview there.
Yeah, and full disclosure, you make me sound like an expert, but I've actually only done 2 syndications as a sponsor, so not that much more than you.
Twice as many as me.
Twice. There you go. I have been a part of another one as a general part. I really don't have much of a role in the property though, but I do talk with a lot of syndicators. I'm constantly looking at different offering documents. So I am very familiar with the different structures that folks are using throughout the industry. So anyways, I just want to preface my comments with that. I don't want to make myself out to sound more of an expert, but anyways, the first syndication that I did, I structured it with basically a 70-30 split. So the ownership structure, 30% to the general partners, 70% to the limited partners. Keep in mind, your general partner can also be a limited partner. So if I invest dollars into my deal, the dollars that I'm investing are invested via the limited partner vehicle. And then for the work that I'm doing, put the deal together, I'm also a general partner. So keep that in mind, but that's typically there's a 70-30 split or an 80-20. In that particular deal, we do have a preferred return of 8%. So all cash flows go to the limited partners to meet that 8% preferred return based on the money they invest. And in that particular deal, I also structured it where after 36 months, the general partner has the option to buy out limited partner shares via an 18% IRR buyout or valuation. So the reason being was unsure on exactly how long I wanted to hold the property. And generally, when people are investing money, they want to know how long they're giving you their money for. So since I wasn't sure how long I wanted to hang on to the property, I wanted to make sure I provided a tool that, made it clear to my investors the expectation as to when they can receive their money back. The benefit of using the IRR tool is when we get to that buyout period, in valuing their shares, if we set the valuation based on an IRR, and people can go do more research on exactly what an IRR is versus average annual return, but basically an IRR helps us take into consideration the time value of money and when cash flows have been paid out, particularly in an uneven manner. So by using an IRR, we can shove the cash flows into an Excel spreadsheet and the months on which they were paid out and hit a few buttons and boom, we know exactly what their shares are worth. And we can all agree that we followed the letter of the contract to the T, and everyone can be happy that expectations were met. If we used hey, I have the option to buy, general partners have the option to buy out the limited partners after 3 years, and we'll just value the property. Well, how do you value the property? Do you get an appraisal? For anyone that's bought enough properties, that appraisals for the most part are pretty much a joke. For instance, I just got an appraisal a year ago on an 8 unit that I had. The appraisal came in at like 470. I sold that property this year for $700,000, and nothing materially changed with that property over the year. We had a little bit of rent increase, but that's just a clear example of an appraisal can grossly underestimate or overestimate the value of the property. And it can, easily put contention amongst the parties as to what the value is truly worth. So I want to make sure that I have good relationships with people. I never want to end up in court. Inevitably, I probably will someday. It's just the nature of being in business, but I don't want it to be with my investors. So I want to make sure that we have clear expectations as to, how we're going to be handling money, buyouts, and what have you. In the second syndication, it was roughly the same exact structure. We did 2 different classes of shares, though. We have one class with the buyout, and then we have another class that they're able to stay in the deal long term. And on that particular deal, we pitched a 7 to 10 year hold period. There's some nuances with the preferred returns in the different groups. But inevitably, the idea is people who are interested in more of a short-term investment vehicle, investing into that class of shares where they get to get out of the deal in 3 years, where that's their expectation. That was a very useful tool for them. So that's, kind of, like I say, providing an investment option for both short-term and long-term in that syndication.
Joel, I wanted to make one more pivot before we kind of get to the Q&A here.
Mm-hmm.
So you are super hands-on. It's one of the things I always enjoyed about you. I also tend to get my hands dirtier than I probably should sometimes. How do you manage all this today? And where do you still add value? Like, is it construction? Is it leasing? Is it management? Is it bookkeeping? Where do you still get your hands dirty today? And how did you decide that, I guess? Talk a little bit about, how you decide to operate and why.
So just to shed light to folks, John knows how I've done things. I mean, I was the guy renting the skidster, picking it up from the store with my truck, driving it, doing the landscaping projects, building fences, gutting units, doing the leasing. I wore every single hat. I was painting, doing plumbing, doing electrical, swapping water heaters, furnaces, everything I was doing myself as I built up my portfolio. And that's how I saved dollars. Inevitably, though, you start running out of time. I have not done a single bit of physical labor for probably the last 4 months to 5 months, which is just so weird. It's a very different thing for me. And I haven't spoken to a tenant in any meaningful manner with respect to leasing or issues going on, really this entire year. So I hired a full-time office person to come on my team, property manager, back in January, and basically put all tenant relations, communications, leasing, rent collection, all of that is on her plate. And then with the latest 48 unit acquisition back in August, I was able to hire a full-time maintenance person to come on. He's kind of a veteran in the industry and didn't like his kind of corporate job with a larger management firm. He wanted to move to kind of a smaller company. So anyways, he's been doing a great job. So from my standpoint, I really try to sit back and let my team members manage the properties. We have some tools that we're using through Appfolio to manage their progress. How are we doing on the leasing front from an occupancy standpoint, from a collection standpoint? Are we meeting those targets? If we're not, what do we need to be doing to correct those? So basically, I try to focus on our metrics. And if we're not quite meeting those, and I can see it's kind of veering off course, that's when I step in and I ask either team member and I say, hey, how can I help? What is the issue here? What can we be doing differently? And either provide guidance or specifically, try to talk with a contractor. But for the most part, I'm trying to stay out of it as much as I can. For me, it really comes down to, making sure that we are focused on being as smart as possible in our capital allocation. And in our breakout room, we talked a little bit about the fact that I have actually parsed back our unit renovations lately, partly due to the labor issues and material issues that we're seeing in today's market. But at the same time, I'm seeing such strong growth in our rents in the markets that we're in. We don't need to renovate our units to the extent we originally planned to meet our revenue targets for growing our rent. So why should we be spending an extra $5,000 per unit on renovations when I can do a light flooring and paint upgrade, maybe swap some fixtures, and we're good to go. So for me right now, it's really focusing on kind of the business standpoint of capital allocation, and then trying to be diligent in making sure that and managing those metrics to see, you know, a month by month basis, is my team staying on track on a week by week basis? Are we meeting our goals? But that's pretty minimal. I mean, it's a couple hours a week for managing, you know, my 103 units. So it's not much.
That sounds way better than what I'm doing, which is not a couple hours a week. One more question, Joel, and then we're going to pivot to Q&A. Your next deal is you're doing some sort of a fund for RV parks. I guess why RV parks and why a fund?
Yeah. So I, can't quite get into too many details on the fund or what have you, but from a high level, I have always been interested in getting into some other type of business. I mean, I've made offers on, granite fabrication, installation companies. I almost bought a window manufacturer at one point. I have a lot of ambitions professionally. So I've been looking for some other way to quench that thirst, if you will. Absolutely still going to be doing the multifamily thing, still actively looking at deals, making offers. But kind of two things in particular, I guess I'll call out. One is on the multifamily side. I do have my concerns about my ability to continue to grow in the market at the pace I want. The pricing for some of the larger assets I'm trying to get into is really tough, in my opinion. That's fluctuating, but it's definitely hard to break into that 100+ unit space and feel comfortable in the pricing that I'd like to be at. So I'm cautious to push too far too fast, and just want to continue to grow in the multifamily as I feel comfortable. The RV park space, and when I say RV parks, it's really campgrounds, RV resorts, not mobile homes, not mobile home parks, not mobile home parks that allow RVs. It's RV resorts and campgrounds. But what's interesting with that space is the properties are valued very similar to a multifamily property, still based on a cap rate. We're just looking at 7 to 12 caps instead of 4 to 6 caps or 4 to 7 caps. So I can also get the same financing from community banks buying a campground as I can multifamily. And actually I can get into SBA type programs and some USDA programs that actually allow for very, very interesting financing options that are competitive with agency type programs, and in some cases better. So I can get the same kind of debt. I'm buying at, double the cap rate, which means my cash flow can be 15 to 25%. And then from a value add perspective, there's so many avenues for me to go down in that space to add value to a campground, whether that's expansion of sites, which cost $5,000 to $10,000 a site for me to add, but they'll produce 20 to 30,000 in value to the property. And then you talk about adding cabins, tree houses, adding a store, ancillary services that you charge to folks. There's a lot of different interesting things that you can do, and it all wraps into that same valuation formula. So it's pretty unique, and it's pretty lucrative space that is also not getting tons of attention. So I think there's a little competitive advantage. It also sounds like a lot of fun. I love the outdoors. I love camping. I just got back from 5-week RV trip out west. So, you should probably wake up and do something every day that gets you excited and you love. So and provides you the benefits that you want to get financially and from a lifestyle standpoint.
That's awesome. I think at this point, let's open up for question and answer. I want to kind of keep the conversation fluid. So who has questions for Joel? Just jump right in.
Hey, Joel, Brad here.
How's it going, Brad?
Good, good, good. I am a client of John Warren's, house hacked a 3-flat in Cicero. So that's kind of how I got my starts. And I have, I've been looking at Indiana for a little bit. Actually, I'm already on some wholesale lists for Michigan City, and all the way around the horn of Lake Michigan, all the way back to Northwest Indiana. I was just wondering if you could give kind of your general perception of that swath of the market, and how you see things unfolding in the next 5 to 10 years in terms of growth, or is there dynamic still going on? Is it seem pretty static these days? Just love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm super bullish on, Northwest Indiana, Southwest Michigan, with caveats. Real estate is, hyper local. People always say location. Yeah, of course. There's good markets and bad markets within every market. I mean, I refuse to go to Illinois, and I refuse to touch Chicago. There's obviously plenty of you in Chicago that have been doing very well for yourselves in real estate, and you'll continue to do well. So anyways, within the Indiana, kind of Southwest Michigan markets, the areas that are really succeeding and doing well, you're looking at Crown Point, you're looking at Valparaiso, you're looking at Chesterton. Those are really going to be your hottest growth markets. There's some neighboring communities within that are, stable and seeing growth off of that Porter. I'm in Michigan City. I'm not very bullish on Michigan City, to be honest. It has so much potential. It's crazy. But there's, other than the vacation rental space down by the lake, I don't really have much faith in Michigan City. I really think local government is really missing the boat on helping the community move forward in a good direction. LaPorte, on the other hand, there's some really good things going on down there. So I feel much better about the city of LaPorte and that community. I had a couple different properties over in South Bend. South Bend has some really rough parts, but there's also some really booming markets within that region. Obviously, I'm doing the RV park campground thing, and over in Elkhart, it's like 80% of the industry is over there. So it is a little bit of a boom and bust area when it comes to the manufacturing. Right now it's absolutely bursting at the seams. So South Bend has had its fastest growth rate, or the newest census this last decade. South Bend saw its strongest population growth since like the 60s, which basically means it's going up instead of down. But that's a good thing. That's a good thing. So I did extremely well in South Bend with a couple of properties that I had. Yeah. Like I say, I mean, anywhere where they're building new stuff is a good thing. So if they're not building anything new, that probably tells you that, it's not very exciting. And everywhere in Indiana that they're building new neighborhoods, subdivisions, apartment complexes, those areas are really growing fast and for really good reasons.
Great. Thank you so much for that information.
Joel, it's been terrific. All the information is so good. You mentioned at one point that, appraisals are a joke, which is this universally accepted thing. But at the end, everything has to be appraised. What do you do to manage that environment? The guy that bought the building for $700,000 from you, didn't it ultimately have to be appraised for $700,000?
Yeah, appraisals have this weird propensity to magically land on the number that you're purchasing at, plus or minus maybe $10,000. So, ultimately in all of my transactions that I've purchased, I have held the hand of the appraiser. I have fed them the comps that they should be using. I have found rent rolls, I've got my broker relationships. I call up my brokers and I say, hey, I've got an appraisal going on. I need comps, I need rent rolls, I need information, what can you help me with? And I try to make it easy for my brokers where, they, only takes them 5 minutes to pull some information from their databases or what have you, and they can send it over to me. And I'm compiling, I literally have a Google Drive folder that I create for the appraiser, and I'm packing in all the information that they're going to need. And I'm trying to convince them, without a doubt, that they can say it is worth what I'm willing to pay, and they are not going to have any issues from a legal liability standpoint, because appraisers are just worrying about losing their license and getting sued. They're hired by the banks, which the banks have that as a policy for lending. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. I don't know. I think it might not be good if they don't exist. I think it's better in the residential space, but in the commercial space, generally everyone's more sophisticated who's doing this, or at least you hope. So, but that's how I deal with it is I am feeding information to the appraiser, and I'm making sure they know what price is being transacted at. I let them know it's multiple offers, multiple full price offers, even if it really wasn't all full price offers. But really just making them feel like, yes, they have to put the price that this is transacting at on the appraisal. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely. Do you feel like your behavior is the same in that process, whether you're on the buying side or the selling side, or do you feel like one side or the other should stay closest to the appraiser?
With my 2 transactions that I've sold, it was 3 deals in one package, 2 deals in the other package. I had less access to the appraiser. However, once I did get access, I did the best I could with making sure that we provided the information, that I would normally on the buy side. But I've been on the buy side more, and I have more access then, more regular conversations. So some appraisers are a little more, they like to do it on their own. So in those cases, I just try to passively, give them access to the Google Drive folder that has everything that they need, and they can look through it on their own. Some are totally cool having conversations, and I've chatted for hours with the appraiser, going through comps and this and that. So you got to judge their personality types, and some of them are feel really good about, they're in power of the transaction. So definitely don't make them feel like, you make them feel like they're coming to the solution on their own. So
that does help. Thanks.
Hey, Joel. You said you have an 18% buyout option on your short term. If you're not selling within a year or so, or refinancing that fast, how are you covering 18% of their investment just that quickly? Because that 18% is going to blow up real fast, right?
Yeah, so it's 18% IRR on the buyout. Ultimately, we do pay out cash flows. So there's a preferred return in that particular deal in Chester. It's an 8% preferred return. I didn't pay out the full 8% the first year. We didn't have enough cash flows. I had a lot of AC issues with that property. However, this past 12 months, I think they've gotten about a 10% cash on cash return for their investment. So just to kind of throw the numbers out there, bought that property for 1.265 million, and we had 280,000 total that we needed to bring as cash into the deal for our down payment and cash in the bank. 100 of that was mine, so 180 came from other investors. Really a very small syndication, all things considered, from a money raising standpoint. And but to stay focused on your question, when I look at right now, the cash flows that I paid out through my projections for next August, which is when our 3-year buyout period hits, I will owe 200 and comes out to like 222,000 roughly is what I'm expecting to have to pay out to make sure that that 180,000 gets a 18% IRR over the 3-year hold period. So the property right now is probably valued between 1.8 and 2 million. So I've got 900,000 in debt. So next year, you know, I'll refi to about 1.1 and pay off all the investors, and the property will still cash flow really well.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Anybody else have questions for Joel? I know there were a couple of good ones in the chat. Not sure if anybody wants to kind of resurrect their question.
I was curious about your RV and camping. Did you consider other like destination camping areas as well, or were you mostly just looking around here?
So I mean, I've looked at properties all over the country. For the first couple of properties, we're staying kind of in the Midwest. So geographically, a little bit easier, where it kind of takes half a day to hop up to the properties for tackling any of the projects. But ultimately, the vision that I have for what I'd like to create in that space is I'd love to own 50 RV resorts around the country.
Okay. That'll be awesome. Use it for travel.
That'd be pretty cool. So I'm starting with 5 is the goal with the first fund that I'm putting together here. So we'll start there and then we'll run and move forward.
Cool. That's a cool project.
Hey, Joel, this is Margaret. I had thrown a question in the chat a while back. You were talking about hiring, and I was curious, like, what number of units did you get to before you decided you needed some like full-time staff to you could absorb that into your cash flow and still feel good about hiring people? Yeah, it's a great question. So the general rule of thumb is 100 to 120 units. You should be able to afford a full-time person in the office and a full-time maintenance person. And the reason why I know that is you go look at a bunch of apartment complex deals, and once you get to about 100-ish units, 100 to 120, you'll see about 100,000 as a line item for payroll. And that, covers about 50 grand a pop between salary and payroll and benefits. So some people push it a little bit further than that. That's why 120, 130, 140 is a little more ideal, but then you start running issues with your maintenance person. And so anyways, for me, it was like 80, what did I have? 86 units, 88 units, something like that. There was actually a 40 unit that I bought last year in December, syndicated that deal. One of the big reasons why I syndicated that deal is, number one, I thought it was an okay deal. I thought it was pretty good. I was a little concerned about some things. I knew though that I could make it a good deal for investors. I wasn't sure if it would become a home run, but when I considered purchasing it, I knew I'd be able to hire a full-time office person, that I could afford it without taking a hit personally. I really wouldn't gain anything financially from a cash flow standpoint by picking up that new 40 unit, but it would take so much work off my plate. So that really pushed me to do that syndication so that operationally I could add that arm. And that was huge. So it was about 88 units. I hired the first property manager, and then I was basically full-time maintenance guy, unit renovations. And then when I bought that 48 unit, I technically had 126 doors. Just before the purchase, I hired the full-time maintenance guy, but I knew I'd be selling some stuff too. So now we're down to 103. I have the 2 full-time people, pay them pretty well for industry standards for our area. And at only 103 units, I'm really not at an optimal number when it comes to my staffing. I'd really like to be more at 120 doors to 130 with my current team. However, the amount of time
that it allows me to have is, I mean, I can't put a number on that. And at the same time, I'm controlling my properties in a way that I want, which I really like. I didn't have a great experience with some third-party management that I had on a property for a year, but anyways, that's kind of the magic number. And ever since I've had these team members, it's just freed me up so much to tackle new projects, spend time with my family. My cash flow hasn't really gone up a lot since I've taken on these handful of deals, but my time, I've gotten time, and that's worth everything. I just went on a 5-week vacation, and I maybe talked to my team for a total like 2 hours that whole time. And I'd maybe check into email like twice a week for an hour. It was, I mean, that's cool. That's what it's all about. Right. And I'm making money the entire time I'm gone, and my net worth's going up tremendously. So that's exactly what I wanted to build as a business, and it's worked out great.
Thank you.
Joel, quick follow-up. What were some, you had how many property management companies you've worked with, third party in the past?
It's just that one, Marquee.
Okay.
Yeah.
What was the main difference between, the management, the vertically integrated management that you're doing now versus having a third party? What are some of like the main differences there?
Yeah. So a couple things. Number one is the control over maintenance costs. With third-party management, I mean, my experience was I was always finding out after the fact. I mean, technically they were supposed to reach out to me on every $250 charge, but they'd always say, oh, it was an emergency charge. It was an emergency charge. It was an emergency charge. So they just did it. And I'd find out 45 days later, oh, you guys spent how much? Like, what? That was 3 times more. Like, it was really frustrating. So I never knew how much I was going to get. The cash flows that would come off, I'd get $1,000 one month and $10,000 the next. And that ebb and flow, I just couldn't predict what was going on well. And for me, I'm all about value add, executing my plan, and working to push that value. And if I'm not keeping on top of those metrics closely, I'm not able to accurately know how well or not well we're doing on meeting that goal. So I just felt like I was always 30 to 60 days behind. And then it was a challenge to get accurate information as to what really was going on. So having things in-house, I know important things as soon as they happen. With my team, we have, I've got a weekly Friday report that my manager sends me, and that gives me my key metrics. I've got a third-party bookkeeping service I hired, and, so they're keeping up on my books for me. And, collectively, I have, as much control as possible, and just knowing what's happening on a day-by-day, week-by-week, month-by-month basis. And that allows me to either feel really comfortable with where we're going, or know, hey, I got to step in and try and figure out how we can, get this ship back on track here and get us where we need to go. So that's the biggest thing for me. I would say it really comes down to peace of mind and just being, rather than reactionary with third-party management, I can be more proactive having that management in-house.
Quick follow-up to that. Do you still approve every $250 charge, or do you feel like you have just more eyesight on what's going on, so you feel more comfortable? I'm just curious how you've handled it.
Don't approve anything, actually. My team has, they go spend the money as they need. They know what my expectations are. And, I see the charges going on the credit cards, so each of my employees has their own credit card. And so I see all the charges coming in. The receipts all get uploaded into AppFolio on a weekly basis. So I can see each line item that my maintenance guy is spending, buy property at Lowe's or Menards or wherever. If I have any questions, I can obviously bring that up, and we can continually have conversations to adjust expectations. So, I've always told them I'm not going to get mad at them for making a decision on spending money. What I may do is, after the fact, I may say, next time, let's not make that decision. Let's make the decision a different way. Not mad about what you did. Happy you made it. You took action and you got the thing done you needed to get done. But next time, let's go down this different path. So over time, my employees are learning a little bit better what my expectations are on how they should be spending money. So thus far, it really hasn't been an issue. And then with unit turns, that's typically where most dollars are spent. Ultimately, what we do is they go through and take photos, maybe a video as well. As soon as a unit turns, they put together their recommendations like, hey, this is kind of a list of stuff that needs to be fixed. But what do you want to do for upgrades? So that's where I kind of go back to my comments on my job is really capital allocation, on saying how much capital should we really be putting back into these properties to meet our long-term financial goals that we have. So those unit turns are the main area that we're going to be having that discussion. And, we'll have a quick, maybe might even be email back and forth, but generally in our weekly call or a couple times a week, I'll just hop on and I'll just say, hey, you got the unit turn, I got the photos. Why don't you do flooring, paints, and take care of a couple of these things, and that'll be our scope. Or no, let's step it up and go a little bit further, bring in the contractor, bring these guys, and we can execute that larger vision. And then ultimately that was my approval for them spending the money. Does that make sense?
It's awesome. Awesome. Who else has questions for Joel?
I
Time
do.
to- Go for it.
Joel, I'm interested in investing in RV parks as well, but I haven't been able to find an open fund. Do you develop the parks yourself, or do you buy pre-existing RV parks?
Yeah, so our game plan is to go buy existing RV parks and campgrounds and then work to update them and kind of I guess to be a little more specific, my goal is to transition those properties to meet the needs of the top third of RVers by dollars spent. So I want to push to be more in the premium side, where people are willing to spend 50, 60, 70, 80 bucks a night to stay at a place that they get full hookups, Wi-Fi, a luxury resort style pool, and they're willing to pay for those amenities. So that's just like in multifamily, where we're going in and we're renovating kitchens and units and upgrading these old properties, buying below replacement value and bringing the property up to to bring in additional revenue. Doing the same thing in the campground space. There's just a lot more levers that we're able to go pull to boost that value.
Well, you have to remain competitive with organizations, which currently charges about $80 a night. So if you can offer a better product for lower price, then I think you'll get it. Otherwise, you're going to lose them to the boondocking. A lot of them are just going to sit on the side of the road or wherever. Yep. You got any advice for how I can get involved in that market? As I said, most of the funds I tried to get into are already closed. They're not open to any new investors. Are you open to any new investors?
Shoot me an email, because within probably 2 weeks, I'll have a fund that'll be opening up. So it's not official yet. So shoot me an email. And let's hop on a call in the next couple of days and we can chat further.
Do I have your email address? John, could you post his email address?
Absolutely. I'll put it here in the chat while we're going.
Okay. Thanks, Joel.
Sounds good. Talk to you soon, Joe.
Joel, question.
Mm-hmm.
You were talking about unit turns. Obviously, you're in a different market than maybe Chicago. That might be a higher price point, but as a percentage of say the rent income from that unit, what's your sweet spot for how much you want to spend on, like how much is too much or how much is just the right amount in your opinion as a percentage, or however you want to go with the dollar value, like for turnovers, when say the average tenant stays there 2 years, you know, they trash it a little bit. Obviously you got to paint it. You got to maybe put some like nicer, like laminate floors or, you know, what have you, like some new light fixtures. Maybe they're a little dated. What's the number that you're okay with? And what's the number like, you're like, oh shit, like that's too much. Like, I just want to see like, you know, how you look at it.
Yeah, that's interesting. So the way that I tend to pick, if I'm not doing every unit to the full upgrade, which generally I don't, if a unit turns and it's pretty clean, not much going on, I may choose to just touch up the few little things I need and push it back on the market and get the higher rent if it was severely under rent. If a unit turns and it's rough and it's like, oh, I got to replace all the flooring and we got to paint, we got to fix a bunch of this stuff. So I'm going to have to spend, you know, $3.5, $4 grand just to get it really rent ready at market rate. It'll just be a nicer market rate unit. I might as well just spend an extra $3 grand and upgrade the kitchen cabinets and counters and bathroom vanity and toilet and some other little things, right? So that tends to be a driver for me. If a unit is just rough going in, I might as well spend a bunch of money and make it a really nice unit and get that premium, because I'm going to have to spend a bunch of money anyways just to put it back on the market and make it livable. That tends to be a big driver on what units we choose to spend those dollars on. But generally speaking, you know, I'm willing to spend $5 grand to get $100 rent bump. That's pretty good. That's probably pretty appropriate. I would say it's like $2,500 for every $50 that I'm gonna see. So it's not an exact science, but
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
that's probably pretty appropriate in line, because at $100 a month, it's $1,200 a year, right? You know, someone can do the math with a calculator, but
That's going to pay off in 4 years.
at a 6 cap, you know, that's how I look at it. Is from a cap rate perspective, whatever rent increase you do, you know, what is that differential between what you're spending on a unit versus what you're going to get in equity? And that's where, like, my property manager, you know, she just got a $250 rent bump. And I was like, hey, like, that's a $40,000 increase in the property value. So, you know, just made $40,000 in equity that month on that one unit turn. So that's how I'm constantly thinking about it. I don't think about it like a cash flow thing. It's all about equity. How much equity do you get off of that rent bump?
Thank you.
That's what the game is all about. It's about building wealth at the end of the day.
How long do you typically expect to keep them before you sell them? I mean, it's not like a set number maybe, but if you do have a set number in your mind.
Well, the 26 units in South Bend, I mean, that was 12 and a half months from close to close. Another South Bend property was like 3.5 years. My Iron Mountain stuff was between 6 and 3.5 years. So it really depends. I used to be more in the camp of like, I'm going to build a portfolio and hang on to these things forever. And I just never want to sell them. And I'm just going to let them pay down and it's going to be awesome. And then when I look at my long-term goals, I do my goal setting every year. And then really this last year it happened where I looked at my goal setting and I was like, my small properties don't align with what my long-term goals are for building a real estate business. I really need to consider selling them. And when I started looking at them, I said, okay, well, let's take the 26 unit. So in the 12 months, I built up, it was 700,000 all in between a purchase and my upgrade budget. And I was able to get under contract for 1.1, and it was in a 12-month period. I mean, that's a phenomenal increase in equity. And if I looked out and I said, well, how much more rent increases can I really get? How much more capital is going to be needed over the coming years? How many roofs are going out? How much windows and doors do need to be replaced? What about mechanical systems? I was like, there's probably only a few $100,000 more that I can squeeze out of this thing, and it might take me 2 to 3 years to do it. So if I cash out today, can I move that equity into some other project that has a lot more opportunity? And it was the case with both the South Bend property. I was like, I might only be able to generate another 300,000 in equity off these things over the next 2 to 3 years. But I sold those things and I moved it into a 48 unit. And honestly, I think I can build $1 million in equity into that property in the next 12 to 18 months. So rather than taking 2 to 3 years to build up 300,000 more in equity, I think I'm going to be able to hit $1 million in the next year to year and a half off of that same money, right? So by selling, I velocitized that equity in a new transaction. Some might say, well, why don't you just refi and pull the cash out? But if you're constantly leveraging up and your properties don't align with your long-term goals, I don't necessarily think that's always a good play as well. I've done multiple refinances, but this year I decided to sell a bunch of stuff. Market's good, can cash out well, and I think my money can do better in something else. So
Yeah, I mean, those are very similar to my thoughts too, like, because I have a lot of 2 flats and 3 flats that I used to buy like when I first started, and I'm still hanging on to those and they're all paid off. And I'm like, I could sell this and get all this extra money. Then I look around and I'm trying to look at, buy a bigger building, and I see the bigger buildings that are trading at 5 cap. I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, I need to get similar return when I do all that selling and buying. That's the challenge. So the multifamily cap rates are kind of shitty when you look at larger properties, right? So that's the other.
But on the flip side, as long as the cap rates reasonably hold, the value that you add, the boost to the NOI goes that much further in the equity growth that you have. So it's a double-edged sword. Your cash flow isn't as strong. It's maybe a little scarier coming into it because we're not used to those kind of prices. But as long as the cap rates reasonably hold, then you have the opportunity to really accelerate your net worth. And there's plenty of other folks that, if you go listen to podcasts on why would you invest in Phoenix buying at a 3 cap? Well, it's exactly that. That's the story people tell you. So anywho, John, I know we're coming up to the end of the hour here.
Yeah. I was gonna say, we're gonna kind of round it out. So I guess if there's one last question anybody has, go ahead and blast it out for Joel.
This was extremely informative. I'm brand new, and thank you very much for your insight. This may not be the right forum for it, but are there any resources that a new person can look to try to get started, or that? I'm really just looking for a beginning.
Yeah. Well, this is a great place, right? It's, as I mentioned, I started with a little 4 unit, and that was just 6 years ago. So Bigger Pockets is always the generic. Yeah, go check them out. You're going to learn a ton of stuff. That's where I started. It was extremely helpful for me.
I'm sorry, what was that? You said it was called, what was it called? Bigger Pockets? Is that what you said?
Yep. Bigger Pockets. It's like the real estate online social network. So
okay, great.
That's going to be a fantastic resource for you. You're going to learn a lot of stuff there. Networking events like these are fantastic. And, at the end of the day, if you plan on being an active investor, you're buying deals, repositioning them, maybe you're using third-party management, maybe you're managing yourself, but you're actively investing as opposed to a passive investor, someone that writes a check and sends it to somebody else to let them go find deals, buy them, and operate them. If you plan on building your own portfolio, I think you know, fantastic places to start out. Go buy a duplex, go buy a triplex, you know, do research in advance, find other people that are doing it, you know, make sure you're not getting yourself into a really bad situation, but you're not going to do, you're not going to hit a home run right away. But what you're going to do is, you know, you're going to get a heck of a lot of experience, confidence, figure out whether you like or don't like this thing. And that's going to propel you forward faster than any resource, any book. It's taking action. Or put that comment in there. It's taking action, getting out there, getting your first property. You know, my first property is one that I lived in. It was, you know, I lived in one of the apartments and rented out the other 3. So
Yeah, that was,
I
that
looked
was
at it
gonna
as,
be, yeah, that was what I was gonna ask you was,
yep,
is that's probably a start, is a
I
triplex,
recommend
a
that to
duplex.
everybody.
Right.
If, you know, if you're married and you have kids and your spouse refuses to let you move out of your house, well, okay, that might not be an option for you. But if that's not the case, buy something, go move into one of the units. You're there, it's your home. People are paying your rent. You're building equity. Even if you know, don't quite sell it for what, you know, you bought it for at the end of the day and put a bunch of money in on it. Hopefully you're going to make a little bit, but even if it's not a fantastic place, it was your home. You reduced your monthly spending and you started your career building an asset. You're going to get better terms, you know, go get like 30-year amortized note, low interest rate locked in. It's better than all the commercial financing any of us are getting on larger properties. So that's the #1 place I recommend people start. And I'm always so frustrated when my friends ask me, how do I get into this? I tell them that advice and they don't take it. And they go buy a house and then it's like, gosh, you just, you know, you didn't take action. Those people aren't going to build anything substantial in real estate, most likely. To just be frank and honest. And it's, you know, I wish them the best and hope they can still do it. But anyhow, hopefully that helps.
Yeah,
John,
it's not
I'll
for
pass it back
everybody.
to you.
That is a big help. Thank you so much for your help and your insights. Thank you.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Joel. That was awesome. Really, thank you for being our guest today. For our audience, thanks for coming. This was really fun. We're gonna have one more meetup here on Zoom for the season in November. It's gonna be our combined November-December one. We do not do one right before the New Year's because nobody would come. Everybody's too busy partying. So anyway, look out for that link. Last meetup of the year will be 1 month away at the end of November. And the recording for this will be online. So if you want to go back and look for those nuggets that Joel dropped all along the way, they'll be there. So yeah, again, thank you, everybody.